All right, welcome everyone who's here and welcome everyone who is online. It's really nice to have the live streaming option. I love that people who are not in our community geographically can still join at the same time that we're all joining here together. So we can all learn together wherever we're from. Well, I know it's getting darker earlier this time of year. It's colder. But thanks for venturing out. I'm glad we have this nice, warm, beautiful, bright space that we can all gather together. And I hope you enjoyed the French themed items over there. It's kind of fun to have a theme to work around. We didn't go as far as escargot, but hopefully the croissants and bonbons kind of still gave us a flavor of that. I'm going to pass around this sign-in sheet as I normally do, just so we have a record of who is here, and then I'll follow up with additional details of the class. But thank you all for joining. We're going to point out our special guests here who live in the Simone Weil house in Portland, which some of you were talking about, that maybe that's your only recognition of our special guest tonight, Simone Weil. And so that's a cool connection of a place here in Portland that obviously thinks highly of her and her work and tries to emanate that in what they do. And we'll learn more about what that is exactly that she did and why she's been such a important role in our faith and just the journey of the past century plus. So I'll bring Father Ganz up and he'll go ahead and introduce us to Simone Weil. Thanks for being here.
So today's the feast day in the Catholic liturgical calendar of Saint Albert the Great, who was a Dominican, formidable, extraordinarily powerful intellect, and a saint. Try to put intellect and sanctity together, and you're already getting close to what Simone Weil was about, trying to bring together an absolutely fierce and sometimes just plain scary intellect, so bright and so spare and exact in things that she saw, together with the mystical understanding of God who found her, who never felt that she should be found like that. St. Albert the Great was the teacher, and which means not just the teacher, but the inspiring person in the causing of St. Thomas Aquinas to exist in the world. He was his star pupil. Today, the gospel that's chosen in the liturgical reading of the Catholic Church is the story about Zacchaeus. And it's about a man who everyone already knew everything that they needed to know about him. Bad, disordered, scoundrel, thief. Well, he's a tax collector. So we already knew what we needed to know. And Jesus unerringly paid attention and saw something else and refused to go with simply the reputation of the man and paid attention. Why in the world would a man so embarrass himself as to run out and climb up a tree just to look at me? There must be something worth attending to. This again starts pushing us towards Simone Weil and her famous and deep thinking about paying attention. Come, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We who are physically here, we who are, if you will, almost mystically present through the streaming mechanism. Thank you for gathering all of us together, near and far. Please make us available to this remarkable woman and the gift she gave and still tries to give. We place our trust in you. Amen. Sometimes people are just too hard to bear. I remember a time when there's one of the gospel accounts speaks of Jesus as simply, he was just simply too much for them. They couldn't find a way to put him in the right box where he properly fit, because he didn't fit in any boxes. He was bigger than any box. And Simone Weil, it was hard to be Simone Weil. I think she was a force. There was one scholar who was skeptical of someone so bright. So she and her brother, Andre, he was 4 years older than she, somehow got the right gifting through their parents. Andre, when he applied for the École Normale Supérieure, which is the highest level in France. We don't have anything like that in the United States that I can think of, except maybe the honors program at George Fox University. But it's so difficult to get into, and it's an absolute, you pick people of extraordinary capacity and you teach them how to teach other people. That's what a normal school was. It was to teach the teachers, but really it was to enable the gift to happen. And so it was extremely difficult to get in. Andre, her brother, got in on the first shot. Testing, there was a formidable test that you took to be considered. First of all, you had to even be invited. And then you had this test that was so daunting. Well, he was #1 in the nation in his score, became in the 20th century one of the greatest mathematicians of all, in number theory and algebra, just absolutely searingly bright. His younger sister, Simone, well, it's interesting that he had this to say. Toward the end of his life, he, referring to Simone, said, well, I was just a mathematician. She didn't test well when she first tried to get into that École Normale Supérieure because she was distracted by other things that were part of the things that she felt she was supposed to be distracted by, and so didn't make it. So she said, I will make this. And so she took the test again, and like her brother, became #1 in all of France in her score and began her study. What was important about that school is when you see gifts, we can't put those in people. The worst thing you can do with gifts like that are so beautiful in a person is to generalize them and put them in a curriculum where they have to perform, when what you want is to release the gift and let them go where they need to go. Follow them, and then just keep putting before them the next step. It's just devastating to just generalize. So that's what that institution in France was about. Go with the gift and let them pretty much find their own course of study. And she did. I'd like to describe to you how people saw her, how she appeared to people. And the only way I can do that is to give you some quotations of those trying to describe this woman. Inevitably, this unsexing of the self, this unhappiness with her body, gave rise to suspicions of anorexia. Notice, instead of paying attention to what's actually going on, you just try to find a label and stick it. Say, that's what it is. Beyond dispute is that Simone was a stranger inside her own body, suspicious of the very fact of embodiment. And her body in turn betrayed her. She was spectacularly clumsy. She was tormented by agonizing migraines that drove her to the brink of suicide. and by childhood illnesses and traumas, the effects of which would never abate. She was betrayed by having been born a woman in a man's world. You're already starting to pick up something of her personality. Anything about labels and getting people in there, man, woman, smart, not, rich, poor, any of those are automatically a violation at the most deep level in her. She had an enormous sensitivity to the way we create divisions among ourselves, which you would call separation from each other. It was intensely painful to her. Another example. When still a child, she was traumatized when she overheard a visitor praising brother and sister, one as a genius itself and the other beauty. I remember this mistake my dad made. He was trying with 6 kids, all fabulously talented. He was trying to figure out a way to bless us and not let us be generalized as the Ganz children, but try to pick out something in particular that would be our signal thing as a way of allowing us to be distinctive in the middle of the clan. So Dad made the mistake, lethal one, but I get the idea that Carol, the oldest, she was the beautiful one, and Katie, the number 2, was the smart one. Well, it just didn't work out. Anyway, you kind of get a sense of that. So Simone was traumatized by having heard someone refer to her as beautiful, because it wasn't that she eschewed beauty or wanted to get away from beauty, not at all. It's what she felt that came with that compliment, a framing of her that felt like separation. Well, that means someone's ugly, or that means someone isn't quite. She was just hugely sensitive to this. It was inbuilt, and it was a terrible blessing. The observation hit the mark. She had fine, curly black hair, porcelain skin, and black almond-shaped eyes that suggested those of Byzantine frescoes. As for her brother, she herself would compare André's childhood to Pascal's, a childhood that fully presaged his development into the one of the leading mathematicians of the century. Like her brother's genius, her beauty too was real and visible. For nothing is more visible than beauty. Whereas Simone's own genius was for years less visible, yet no less real. We almost had nothing of her writings till 15 years after she died. So all the deep, most penetrating essays she wrote toward the end of her life were simply unknown and unpublished. She died in, 1943, and it wasn't until early 1950s that these other works started coming out. So like Jared Manling Hopkins, who was a visitor at the night school once, he also, probably just a few poems published in his whole life. And it was Robert Bridges later on who found his work and said, this cannot go unknown. And so suddenly he becomes among the top 2 greatest Victorian poets that's ever existed in English. Just one other. A tangle of black hair hid a pale countenance overpowered by a pair of face-eating, horn-rimmed glasses. She looked at a classmate as if she belonged to another order of being. Well, she did. Her garments, always with a monastic masculine cut, told the rest of the story. A cape, boyish flat-heeled shoes, a long full skirt, and a long body-obscuring jacket in dark colors. Her pockets were stuffed with tobacco and papers for writing, as well as smoking, assuming there's a difference, would be stained by a bottle of watermark ink that she had failed to close properly. So she was kind of physically a wreck. But I like this. She's very Flannery O'Connor kind of starting to appear It's one of these things I've wondered about. There's no way of knowing it. But I have had this long wondering about whether Jesus might have been remarkably ugly. Why do we dress him up and make him look so handsome like me? I mean, why? Sometimes I've wondered that one of the reasons they associated him with a suffering servant whose appearance there was nothing to commend. What if he was genuinely homely? And the thing that startled people with such beauty came out of something so unexpectedly unattractive. There's a little bit of Simone in this. It's almost like she cultivated a silencing of the beauty of her body because of this that she served within her that truly was beautiful and caught her attention. Don't know. Her powers of concentration became legendary. She signed herself impossibly long lists of study, which means books to read, and disappeared for days at a time without food or sleep to devour her chosen texts. She carpeted her floor with books, crawling on her hands and knees from one end of the room to the other, guided by her myopic eyes, her nose buried deep in the volumes without respite. I thought it was important with her, unlike other people I've seen, to give you a sense of what she looked like, because I think that's part of what's going on with her. She spent her life with a searingly clear sense of the afflicted of the world, those whose existence had been brought to nothing, turned into things. Give an example. What the heck do we mean when we refer to a Republican, the poor, a Trumpist, a Ratzingerite? What exactly are we talking about? It's a generalization that leaves so much out and allows us to get away from any real insight to actual people that are actually in front of us. It's a kind of deep laziness. Simone was unable to be lazy like that. And so it was almost as if she wore in her own demeanor something so off-putting, as if to make her like the very people that God had given her a heart to see and to care about. She is a puzzle in a lot of ways. But after a while, it starts, you see where the pieces start to fit and what God was up to with her and how she started to respond to it. Do you know the difference between being sympathetic and empathetic? So sympathetic, pathos, it means that you have a capacity to receive, as if passively, actively passive, the reality of something different, the reality of the other. It's something that you can, there's a pathos, you can receive it. Sympathetic means a capacity to be with that other thing. Empathy is a capacity to be inside the otherness of the other. So it's the Atticus Finch with his kids, Scout and what was the other guy's name? Their brother, Scout and yeah, Jim, that's it. To say you have to walk inside the shoes of another person. You have to learn how to enter their reality. Now, you can't just invade the otherness of the other. It requires relationship. You have to establish some sort of trust, because to enter the reality of another in a true way is a gift they give you, to come inside their life and let you feel what it's like to be them. Empathy. This is the very heart of the incarnation, God's choice, not just to come and be with us, but to actually be us, to know us from the inside. At the heart of Simone Weil is empathy, not sympathy. So that means at the heart of her thinking is a capacity for relationship, a requirement of relationship. You can never just speak of the poor, the afflicted. You have to actually know an afflicted person. Don't you get tired of that? Well, I'm an old guy, so I get to be tired in my old age. But don't you get tired of people who talk at such length about a kind of person, but they don't actually know any? They don't actually have friends who are gay or square or purple or whatever they are. They just have an idea about them, and then they've thought through and have some good ideas. That's not even sympathy. It could be condescension. Empathy is different. You have to actually know the other. And that can only happen if they give you welcome to enter their reality. Make sense? Are we good? Okay. A romantic at heart, I'm not going to quote from you, it's like little pieces that give you a romantic at heart. She was in equal part a Stoic. So you remember the Stoics from last time, the wonderful professor from George Fox. Is George Fox a very good university? I think it might be. Anyway, he's a good professor, and he did such a wonderful job with one of the great Stoics, a Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. And they had this amor fati, is in Latin. It means a love of fate. Well, what it really means is something that was picked up in the 17th century French mystics. It means accept what you've been given. The way to happiness is to fully dwell in the experience, the life position that you actually have, instead of vexing your spirit your entire life, wanting to be a different kind of person, look different, have a different station, be in a different location. Oh my goodness, right? We could use some amor fati in the American spirit, because we're constantly being drilled into, it's not enough, you should have this. If you would be happy, you go this way. Constantly being drilled into us. The Stoic is, what you have is your path. It's not in the way of your path, it is your path. Happiness, peace will come in full acceptance of that. She had the Stoic. I never saw her cry, said a best friend. It was other people's pain that moved her, not her own. And she had enormous physical pain all the time. The migraines, the lack of eating, because she'd get so focused on her work that she'd forget to eat. That kind of thing. From early in life to late, no border could contain her empathy for the plight of others. From soldiers on the front lines to enemies subjected to harsh treaties, like France in relation to Germany after the First World War, that devastating Treaty of Versailles that so humiliated the Germans, so deeply humiliated them. I mean, you kind of understand why there was so much pain in that war. But to humiliate an enemy is a foolish mistake. From workers in the luxury hotels in which her family vacationed, to factory workers, slaves to machines, from present Holocausts to those buried in the distant past. But what she could least bear was separation, holding herself apart from those outside in pain. It would brand her forever. It would make her a slave. As she confessed later, it was only when she realized she herself was a slave and that Christianity is the religion of slaves that she became aware of her spiritual vocation. What does she mean by a slave here? It means that you don't have a life of your own. It is inside completely the reality of another. And normally we think of slave as master and slave. What she meant was this empathy that seared her and sensitivity to the pain of the afflicted caused her to dwell in their reality through empathy, as if they were her master. They were the one that occupied her attention, held her attention. In a certain sense, a slave of the enslaved. And it was through this that we start to see how her godless in training, her family was Jewish, but only in name. They didn't raise her with any sort of religious training at all. That Christ started to access her, who had always been there. Christ was always at work in this person. I'm going to give you a sense of it. It comes from Simone Weil, The Essential Writings. This author, Eric Springstead, is really one of the really good readers of Simone Weil. I want you to hear her words, where she's writing to a man that she met a year before she died, who was a quadriplegic, rendered such by a bullet in the war. And she, with startling Simone Weil-ness, gained an affection for him in his disenfranchisement and immobility, slave within his own body. And she had the gall, but this is like she was, had a great and loving sense of him, but said to him in this letter, a magnificent letter, said, "You're kind of getting it, but not yet. Because at some level in you, Joé, you're resisting the suffering in which you dwell. You're still fighting it. And the true way is to find in your broken and immobilized body the very presence of a world at war that was broken and rendered immovable by evil and damage. The only way to actually understand the world is to have become a part of it." And she considered that Christianity was the religion that went straight to brokenness. That's why Catholics always had a problem with an empty cross. We always have the body hanging there. It's a crucial piece for us. We've got to see the brokenness. It doesn't mean Christ didn't raise, and I get that idea of the empty cross. Well, he's raised. Why look for the living among the dead? But the point is he's both exalted and crucified at the same time. And in the resurrection, he still has the wounds. You'd think he'd heal those things up. Christianity is the religion of the shattered and the broken, and Christians are supposed to move into sync with it, empathic, non-separation from the broken places of the world. Because it's not just, oh, isn't that sweet? You're just so giving. It means, no, we won't understand the world like we're supposed to, because the world is broken and torn. And we're horrified. Humans are. We want to get away from it, move back from it. She couldn't help it, if you will, but she also was for it, was to move into brokenness, not just for accompaniment. Oh, isn't that nice? But because you and I are blind to a huge part of what the world actually is. It is a mean and vicious place. And to say that is not be cynical and not another voice that's complaining. No, it just is. It's fierce and ugly. And we eat people all the time. Somebody was saying recently, I remember, and it went off in me like just inside of me. It really unraveled me for a few days. They were saying something, made just some comment about human sacrifice in the past. For some reason, I was highly available to that insight. And it just went off in my mind like, we're still doing human sacrifice. All the time. Churches no less. Whenever they say, no, you don't belong here. No, you're not right. And we willingly just throw people away until they get their act together. And you kind of go, well, no, what are we talking about? That's what we're for. That's why we exist, is to heal separation. We're not them. We're not like them. And create just patterns of power that keep people out. Unless they measure up and do that kind of stuff. I'm pushing you. I'm trying to be like Simone Weil with you, lacking her brilliance. But I'm trying not just to talk about her, but kind of be her a little bit in the way I'm talking. That really bothered her. Christianity is the religion of slaves, the disenfranchised. And if we think we aren't enslaved, we're blind. We don't understand. So she's talking to this guy. Here he is. And she says, well, you still don't get it. And she does it with great sensitivity, but she doesn't apologize. She says, I know this is awkward of me to say this, but no, she didn't do that. She said, you still aren't there. She said, you're still resisting, but you are so close to breaking through. Listen to one of the things she says, and then I'll read the other thing that she says. I believe that the root of evil in everybody, perhaps, but certainly in those whom affliction has touched, and above all, if the affliction is biological. So she's talking to him. Your body is a prison for you. Brought that by a bullet. It is the sole consolation, the unique resource of the afflicted. This will take you by surprise. The one solace to help them bear the fearful burden of time, and a very innocent one, besides being indispensable, is daydreaming. The root of evil is daydreaming. Think of that. Imagining it might not be the way it is, or imagining what my life would be like if I had my arms and legs back, or imagining if there wasn't a world with war, or imagining if people weren't mean. It's all daydreaming. And she says, it can help when you're trapped, when you're in terrible exiles, to go off into daydreams. So she's not missing that part. So how could it be possible to renounce it, daydreaming? It has only one disadvantage, which is that it is unreal. To renounce it for the love of truth is really to abandon all one's possessions in a mad excess of love and to follow him who is the personification of truth. And it is really to bear the cross, because time is the cross. Isn't that astonishing? And she goes on. What does she say here? And even while one is sustained by daydreaming, one must never forget for a moment that in all its forms, those that seem most inoffensive by their childishness, those that seem most respectable by their seriousness and their connection with art or love or friendship, in all its forms, without exception, it is falsehood. It excludes love. Love is real. Isn't that magnificent? You hear how she's doing this. It's so startling. It can be harsh and unbending and sweet and insightful. Like, how can you bear such a person? It's beautiful. Sure, you're trapped, and people are trapped all the time, and usually by other people. And to spend time daydreaming that it might be different, or I wish it were, or whatever, is to traffic in unreality, which is extremely close to my favorite definition of what sin is. It's to have a habit of unreality. The English word sin comes from the Latin verb to be, sum esse fui futurus, in its principal parts. Esse is the root of the English word sin, and it comes from a kind of a justice metaphor. It's kind of a courtroom sort of a thing, and the prosecuting attorney is, kind of running at you and did you not? And I hate what religion has done to the word sin. Often, I feel angry about it. It's one of the most beautiful words that we have in our entire vocabulary, and the whole thing has been flipped into becoming kind of a monster. Sin, sin, sin. You've got sin, and I'm just so sinful. What sin means, the word, is that it's supposed to capture that moment when you finally say, I am he. I did it. I sawed her up with my chainsaw, put her in concrete. That was kind of a October sounding scary. It means you finally come out of hiding and step into reality. I am the one. Sin is supposed to be a glorious word when someone finally moves into freedom of the truth. See how we wrecked it? One last little piece here from this same letter. It's a moment she's describing when something shifted And God, not the religious God, not the Jewish God, not the Catholic God, not the Lutheran God, not the God, found her. A little earlier, when I had already been for years in this physical state, I worked for nearly a year in engineering factories in the Paris region. She didn't want to talk about workers. She wanted to make herself one. And if anyone existed on the planet least appropriate for a factory, it was her. She was hugely awkward. She was just dangerous working in these lines because she could hurt other people and herself. And it finally had to leave because she did hurt herself. But she couldn't bear separation. I refuse to know at a distance what I'm trying to know. I must enter into the reality of the thing I'm trying to know and put it on from the inside, or all knowledge is dangerous. It allows us to use words so dangerous. The poor. What a wretched mistake that is. A generalization that frees us from so much thinking. The combination of personal experience and sympathy for the wretched mass of people around me, in which I formed, even in my own eyes, an undistinguishable item implanted so deep in my heart, the affliction of social degradation, that I have felt a slave ever since, in the Roman sense of the word. And now this. During all this time, the word God had no place at all in my thoughts. It never had. Until the day, about 3.5 years ago, when I could no longer keep it out. At a moment of intense physical pain, while I was making the effort to love, I felt, while completely unprepared for it, I had never read the mystics, a presence more personal, more certain, and more real than that of any human being. It was inaccessible both to sense and to imagination, and it resembled the love that irradiates the tenderest smile of somebody one loves. Since that moment, the name of God and the name of Christ have been more and more irresistibly mingled with my own thoughts. Even though Simone did study at the highest level and obviously was a deeply dedicated thinker and drove herself to try to understand more broadly, I think she might have said that one of the most dangerous disciplines to study is theology, because it allows us to turn God and the things of God into ideas that we can consider, when actually the things of God are meant to tear us to pieces and open us to a depth of life and beauty that is completely beyond our thoughts. Remember once I got in trouble in a classroom. There was a really smart theology teacher, a Jesuit, teaching me. Gosh, credentialed way beyond me. But I never experienced someone more lost than he. He was so much smarter than God that I thought, wow, that's amazing. But it wasn't a judgment I felt. I just felt sad to have people so dangerous working in the world, informing people about God who didn't actually know him. And I just started to cry in the classroom. Not a good thing to do. And the teacher at a certain point just couldn't ignore me. I wasn't trying to appear. I was actually terribly embarrassed and felt very vulnerable. What's the matter with you? And I felt this terrible danger come over me. And I looked up at him with tears and I said, so it's a mistake. I get it. I said, I truly don't think you have any idea who God is. That's not a good thing to do. I suffered for that one. Anyway. God did not get to know us by having the greatest heavenly library to read in. He actually entered our life itself to know us from the inside, so that maybe after 30 years of shutting up, such discipline, 30 years before finally he felt, and with the prompting of the Holy Spirit, that maybe he could have something to say to us that would actually ring true. And when he spoke, we would recognize he knows us. I don't know how he does, because we're all so different. We're from Namibia and wherever, all these different Rio. It seems like he's speaking to us in our own language. I don't know how how does he do that? Remember that the night school it's an exercise in the course of an hour to try to bring someone worth knowing to you. And with the right rhythm, if I can do it and get the right pacing, to push you as hard as I can, take you as deep as I can, try to hold you there as long as you can endure it. So that when it finishes, you go from here desiring conversation, maybe with other people who are with you here. So it's not as interactive as the Faber sessions, which I'll pause and say, any thoughts? Night school usually hasn't been that. It's just to give you as much as possible to try to just blast a space that's too violent for what I'm trying to do and the courtesy with which I'm trying to do it, but to create a space to allow this person to enter your awareness and dwell there. And if that happens through the Holy Spirit, then I'm good, because you're with someone greater than I am, and that's what I want. I want to say something about this line from Simone Weil. Waiting for God was a book that was published again long after she died. It is considered kind of her spiritual testament. Not always, there's gravity and grace, but Waiting for God is kind of the famous book. It's a series of essays on different things, and oh dear, I want to give you a sense of somebody who said, if you want to know how to read her, this is how you should do it. I thought this was well put. To truly hear Simone Weil, one must not sort through her work, discerning where we think she's right or wrong, adding her best zingers to our tool belt, and then moving on. Again, remember, that's to treat her as an object of thought, instead of encountering a fierce and profound spirit, which is what we as teachers want. That would be listening with deaf ears. Rather, I suggest reading a line at a time until she corners you, arrests you, and/or even offends you. Stop right there. Meditate, journal, and ask, how is this thought true? And how might it not be true? At that point, you're beginning to think like her. In other words, you're moving to the inside of her and the way she thinks. You're becoming empathetic. Then look into her eyes and ask, what are you saying to me, about life, about God? And push back hard. Tell her she's wrong and tell her why. Then let her circle in again. Let her infuriate you, seduce you, and rebuff you. Then repeat this dance and certainly never move on. It's nice, right? One of her most famous insights can be captured in this line from Waiting for God. Quote from her: one of the principal truths of Christianity, a truth that goes almost unrecognized today, is that looking is what saves us. Her niece, who had all sorts of problems with Simone, her niece Sylvie, wrote, Simone Weil's notion of compassion is intimately linked with the act of looking, of paying attention. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. She writes, this is closely related to one of the great themes of Simone Weil's writing, the extreme humiliation and dehumanization of the wretched person suffering misfortune and poverty, who becomes a non-person beyond pity. How can you have pity for a thing? I can't have pity for a music stand or a chair. You cannot have pity for something that you've turned into a thing, or as we might say today, a kind of person. It's one of the great and vexatious danger things in our culture right now, is we become so interested in kinds of persons instead of just persons. And so we spend all our time, what kind of person are you? And what are your rights as that kind of person? And we've just lost all contact with, can we just try to figure out what being a person is? That's what's common to all of us. And what does it mean to be a good person rather than a bad one? A sleep person or an awake person? Again, I don't have any right. I'm trying to sound like Simone a little bit. I want to give an example. You're driving. You're coming up to a light. And damn it all, there's a person there with a sign, a poor person. Notice, a poor person with a sign. Need help, looking for a job, have some money. Watch what goes on in you. Now, I'm generalizing, so I'm turning you into things, a type, but I'm just appealing because it frees me from the embarrassment I'm feeling. So I'll just assume you're all like me. So what goes on? Oh God, an immediate sort of, even physically turning your eyes. Oh God, that last car got through. So it means I'm going to be waiting. He's going to be right there. Do I turn and look? Track all that's going on. What is that? Do you immediately start thinking smells and bad smells? Do you think of what they look like? And how all that stuff that goes on. And then, well, no, I help in other ways. And there are, nonprofits that do that. And I'm trying to capture the pathos of all this that's going on that keeps the separation there. None of that is easy. It's not about just figuring it out. No, or better, it's we don't know what to do with it. We're frightened. All of that stuff is smack in the way of empathy. What's his name? Think of the Gerasene demoniac across the Sea of Tiberias. Jesus went there, I believe, because he knew he was there. And for some reason, he felt, I'm going to end this now. This is a terrible pain. I keep hearing about this guy. But unlike others who says, yeah, it's that demoniac, scary, bad, stay away. I really think he sent out word to find out, where does he live? Where did he come from? Where are his parents? What's his name? And I think he learned it. Dexter. And so he crosses the sea. And the sea itself, which is the place of demons, so that would be like the Gerasene demoniac, some of them his peeps. The whole sea rises up to keep him from going there. He says, silence, be still, which perfectly matches what he's going to say to this guy. Same thing. His disciples, what are you doing? Stay away. This is dangerous. All that stuff I'm describing, that just seeing someone on the corner where I have to park and wait for a light to change, these kinds of things are worth thinking about. Why are they there? And should they be there, especially if we are in Christ? Should they? The reason a Samaritan saw someone in the ditch who needed help was not because he, like the Levites who walked past him, who had theology to figure out, this is how you do it, this is the ethics, no, you're not supposed to touch because that makes us unclean. We're on our way to Jericho to do the work of the church, of our religion, and if we touch him, that means we're unclean, which means we're going to have to go all the way up to Jerusalem, wash our hands again and get it all. And then we're going to miss people down there waiting for their donuts after church and all that. So all this stuff is going through their minds. But what it covers, like religious practices sometimes do, is it covers a deep fear and unsettled relation to real affliction. And we can hide inside our rules and keep us from facing it. The reason a Samaritan went towards him was a Samaritan was used to being separate. He was used to being called names and kept on the outside and far from. There was something about, there was recognition. He had the empathic connection to go towards that person. Simone Weil is working in this realm. And she had the unfortunate grace of not being able not to do it. It was an affliction itself to overcome separations and try with every ounce of strength to think her way, why do we do this? And to speak truth there. 7 o'clock. So it's a little bit like what Mary did at the beginning, where there are all these wonderful things, including bonbons, and you just want to eat more, but you really can't. You have to stop at some point. Maybe it's true, like with bonbons, that there was enough here to feed your spirit and cause you to wonder about her. And maybe pick up a book like Simone Weil's Essential Writings, in which you get just little enough. I mean, she is so power-packed that, I mean, just a couple pages and you're already full. She writes amazingly, vividly, powerfully. But give me just a moment. One of the most important transformative experiences for her as a spiritual person in relation to Christ was learning how to pray because I personally feel prayer is so dangerous. We can hide from God inside the prayers we say. But there was a time when the disciples asked Jesus, how do you pray? Because we don't have a sense that you hide from your Father at all. Is there a way of praying that would open access to the way God actually is? And Jesus gave us what we call the Lord's Prayer. It says, try praying this. There was a moment where Simone took the prayer in Greek, because she was fluent in multiple languages. When she had nothing else to do, she'd learn Sanskrit. What do you do with your wasted time? Anyway, and she just memorized it in Greek, and it entered in a profound experience of God. And from then on, she said that every single day, but she practiced complete attention as if God were the abandoned, afflicted other that no one knows, who calls him names that have no connection to the way God actually is as if God himself is the lost and unknown other. And so she prayed through this prayer to give as complete attention to God, the unknown, unnameable other, as she would pray for the afflicted. She saw a connection. God is like that with us who think we know so much about him. So let's say together, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thank you for that, amen, because it just shows that Catholics are better, because we don't add all that other stuff. I'm just kidding. Anyway, Mary, it's all yours.
All right, thank you all again for being here. I'll just give you a couple more of our last gatherings of the year. Hard to believe that next week is Thanksgiving and then we're really into December and the end of the year. But our next night school class will actually be the second Tuesday of the month, just because of the holidays and Christmas. So that's December 12th, with the special guest, the last of this series, Matthew and Luke and the infancy narrative. So that will be here December 12th. The week before that will be our online Faber sessions. And that topic will be the Christmas Carol, kind of focusing on Scrooge. That whole theme has been about monsters, and it's kind of the monster of Scrooge. And then next Sunday is, I've mentioned a couple of times, our fireside gathering, which will be here in town at Amatera Winery. And we have like 10 spots still available, and we'd love for you to come if you're able, whether you're here in person or any of you online that are local. I'll send out some information in the follow-up email, but that's coming up this Sunday. So those are kind of our final pieces through the end of this year, and then we'll continue on with our habits in the new year, and I'll keep you updated on that. But thanks so much for being here. There's more food and drinks in there. I'll put out the bonbons that have been in the freezer. So feel free to stay and chat for a bit if you would like. So good to see you all.